Morning, everyone, for this seminar on digital identity, this seminar on digital identity in the platform economy. In the spirit of SER, we will start with the presentation of the issue paper that you can find on the SER website, and that has been drafted by Christoph Busch, who is a SER research fellow and a very well-known professor at the University of Osnabrück, who is a specialist of the platform economy, has written a lot of very good papers and books on it. And then after this presentation, we will hear from the different voices involved in the policy debate. So first from the Parliament, and then from the industry, and to finish with a national regulatory authority. I will present the commentator later on, but as you know, in SER we always try to have different view and hear the view of all the people involved in the stakeholders in the debate. And so after their let's say comment, we will hear some questions, so don't hesitate to send the question to the panelists, and we will take them as they come. But so first, Christoph, if you can present the main finding of your research. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Alexander. I have prepared a few slides, and I would ask Amaya to share the slides, if that's possible. This looks great. So thank you very much, Alexandra, for the kind introduction and for the opportunity to briefly present the key findings of our project and the key messages of the new SER issue paper. As the title of the paper suggests, it's about the emerging regulatory framework for digital identity services in the platform economy. And I think it's a topic that has been flying a bit under the radar during the past few months when everyone was focusing on the Digital Services Act and the Digital Markets Act. But I do believe that the topic of digital identities deserves more attention. So I'm very happy about this opportunity. Digital ID services have certainly seen a rapidly growing demand across various sectors: healthcare, education, banking, mobility, e-commerce. And as a result, the market for digital ID solutions has become a major battleground in the digital economy, where banks, telecoms, and others are competing with large digital platforms. And in addition to these economic considerations, digital identity is also becoming an important factor of social inclusion in the emerging platform society. Now, our issue paper explores the topic of digital identity services in 3 steps. The first part provides a concise overview of the market for digital identity solutions in the EU. It outlines key concepts and market trends and identifies the main market players. The second part briefly outlines the regulatory trajectory at EU level from the 2014 eIDAS regulation up to the proposal for an eIDAS 2.0 regulation, which was unveiled in 2021. And it also outlines the emerging contours of the new regulatory framework that is currently in the making. Finally, the third part of the paper provides an overview of several regulatory issues that we have identified as crucial and that will probably require further consideration during the trilogue phase. And we also offer some tentative policy recommendations on these issues. It is important to underline that the regulatory debate regarding digital identities at this moment is still very much in flux. So what our issue paper offers are certainly only preliminary observations, but I do hope that they can make a useful contributions for the next stage of the policy debate. So let me start with a quick look at the current market for digital ID services. Digital identities are a key enabler for digital services across many sectors, from banking and mobility to education and healthcare, as I mentioned. And for the purposes of our issue paper, we define digital identity as a digital representation of a natural or a legal person, which allows the identity holder to prove who they are during online or offline interactions and transactions. Now, historically, providing a secure identity to citizens has been the prerogative of governments. But today, digital identity services are no longer solely provided by governments, but can also involve a broad range of actors from the private sector. And therefore, the market for digital identity services has become rather diverse and fragmented. Some member states have government-led public identity ecosystems. In other member states, like the Nordic countries, for example, banks play a key role as identity providers. Other major players in the EU market are telecoms and digital platforms, which offer single sign-on solutions such as Google Sign-in or Facebook Login. Another important feature of the market for digital identity services is that there is a shift in demand from digital identities as such towards specific attributes related to those identities, such as medical certificates, professional qualifications, driving licenses, electronic tickets, and so on. With the increasing number of identity-sensitive and personalized services, there has been an increasing demand by businesses and users for such digital identity solutions. And this trend has been further accelerated, of course, by the COVID-19 pandemic, which has been, in a sense, a catalyst for the growing demand for identity services. And this brings us to the second part of the issue paper and the question how the regulatory framework at the EU level should respond to these changes in the market. In a sense, the European Union was actually a first mover, or at least an early adopter, you may say, in the field of digital identities. The European legislator recognized the importance of digital identities early on with the eIDAS regulation in 2014. Now, this eIDAS 1.0 regulation, as you may call it, has only partially achieved its objectives. In particular, it focuses mainly on public services, and it offers only limited possibility for private services to connect to the eIDAS system. Another weakness of the existing eIDAS framework is that it does not cover the provision of electronic attributes, such as medical certificates or professional qualifications that has become more important more recently. And it is not up to date with recent regulatory developments in data privacy and cybersecurity. So in other words, the eIDAS framework in its current form falls short of addressing new market demands and that have arisen since eIDAS entered into force in 2014. Now, in order to remedy the weaknesses of eIDAS 1.0, in June 21, the European Commission has published a proposal for a revision of the eIDAS regulation. And the new proposal brings a number of regulatory innovations. First, the proposal for eIDAS 2.0 no longer relies on voluntary cooperation of member states, but obliges member states to offer a European digital identity wallet with a broader range of use cases for especially the private sector. Moreover, the acceptance of the European wallet shall be mandatory for public sector bodies, and more importantly, the proposal extends the mandatory acceptance of the European wallet to very large online platforms, or VLOPs, as defined in the Digital Services Act. In other words, if VLOPs, such as Amazon, Facebook, or Google, require users to authenticate, they will be required to accept the European wallet as a means to log on to their services if their users ask for it. The Commission also seeks to create a common technical architecture and common standards for digital identity solutions. And for this purpose, a toolbox, as it is called, with technical requirements for the European wallet is currently being developed by a group of experts. Now, at this moment, the policy debate about eIDAS 2.0 is well underway. In the European Parliament, the Committee on Industry and Energy has published its draft report in the summer. A committee vote, which has been postponed, is now scheduled for late November, and a plenary vote could take possibly place in December. And the Council discussions about the proposal were initiated under the Portuguese presidency. They continued during the French presidency, and most recently, at the end of September, the Czech presidency introduced a fourth compromise proposal. Now, while the policy debate about eIDAS 2.0 is still ongoing, another important element of the future regulatory framework for digital identity services has already been agreed and has already been published in the official journal. And this is, of course, the Digital Markets Act. Article 5 of the DMA prohibits designated gatekeepers from imposing any restrictions on business users regarding the use of competing identification systems. This prohibition seeks to protect the freedom of business users and users to choose alternative digital identity services, just as there is a provision on alternative payment services to the ones of the gatekeeper. As a consequence, for example, a gatekeeper may not require app developers to use its own single sign-on service, for example, single sign-in with Apple or Google sign-in, to be eligible for access to the App Store. Now, while the final contours of the eIDAS 2.0 proposal have not yet been decided, there are several regulatory issues that are crucial in our view, and especially for the development of an innovation-friendly, secure, and competitive identity system that benefits all players in the market. Our report identifies 4 overarching topics that we consider of crucial importance. First, market structure. Second, privacy and cybersecurity. Third, governance and oversight. And finally, the question in which directions the scope of the EU Digital Identity Framework should further expand. Let me very briefly summarize our recommendations and thoughts regarding these 4 topics. First, the new regulatory framework should enable competition between different wallet providers in order to promote innovation and freedom of choice for users. From a technical point of view, this may require fair and non-discriminatory access to key elements of the hardware and software of mobile devices on which the European wallet, which is basically an app, is stored. It is also important that users can switch between different wallet providers and that they are not locked into a single wallet ecosystem. It may also be desirable that users can multi-home and use different ID wallets for different social contexts, just as people are using different messaging services for different social contexts. For example, one ID wallet for healthcare and one ID wallet for education. However, such multi-homing raises issues of security and privacy, which have to be carefully considered. A high level of cybersecurity and privacy will also be a key factor for the acceptance of the EDIW, the European wallet, by users. Issues of trust and security are currently also at the center of the policy debate at the Council. In particular, there seems to be a divergence between member states regarding the level of assurance chosen for the European wallet. A high level of assurance would make it possible to use the European wallet for a very broad range of public and private services, whereas a lower level, only substantial level of assurance would reduce the benefits of the European wallet in comparison with existing wallets provided already by digital platforms such as Apple or Google. Now, from a privacy perspective, the European wallet should also follow the principles of privacy by design and data minimization. In this context, one of the more controversial aspects of the Commission proposal is the envisaged introduction of a persistent and unique identifier for all European citizens and residents. Such a persistent and unique identifier would probably raise constitutional issues in several member states, Portugal, Germany, for example, and a more privacy-friendly alternative could be a unique per service identifier, which does not allow tracking of users across different services. Another issue that will probably require further debate is the institutional design for effective oversight and enforcement. The Commission's proposal was more or less silent on this issue, surprisingly. In contrast, the European Parliament's Industry and Energy Committee suggested in its draft report to add a full chapter on governance to the eIDAS regulation. Now, in this context, the creation of a European Digital Identity Board, consisting of national authorities and the European Commission, could help to ensure the consistent application of the new eIDAS regulation. But it is important that the task of such a European board is made very clear in order to avoid inconsistencies and overlaps with other EU bodies, because there seems to be a proliferation of boards at the European level. So consistencies and clear demarcation of tasks is important here. Finally, and this brings me to the end, and maybe also a bit beyond the current debate about the technicalities of eIDAS 2.0, it may be necessary to think about future extensions of the European Digital Identity Framework. In particular, in the Internet of Things, an identity of things could be necessary to facilitate autonomous interactions between connected objects. Think of M2M communication. Furthermore, shared virtual worlds, such as the metaverse, could create the need for new or adapted digital identity solutions. In particular, it may be necessary to distinguish avatars representing humans from avatar bots that are non-human, for example, in interactions and transactions. But this may be something to be further discussed in the next policy cycle when we start working on eIDAS 3.0. So maybe that's something for the future debate. I stop here, and I'm very much looking forward to the discussion with our distinguished panelists. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christoph, for this very clear presentation, and also with some suggestion to improve today and also to expand tomorrow. So now we will have three commentators, if you want, of your work. The first is Angelika Petrov. She's a policy advisor of an MEP who is very much involved, Aline Mituta, because this MEP is a shadow rapporteur for the text that Christoph was mentioning. So we will start with Angelika, then we will have David Palmer working at Vodafone, and so developing those kind of services for the market in Vodafone. And then we will finish with Lara. Lara, I don't dare to pronounce your name because with the Irish people, I always have some difficulty. So we will stop with Lara if you agree. And Lara is a member of COMREG, the Irish regulatory authority. And so let's start with Angelika. So if you can, the three of you have some initial comment on the report that Christoph has written, and also on how you see this debate on digital identity going forward at the European level. Thanks very much for your participation. And so may I remind the participant that you can ask some question. You go to the Q&A function in Zoom, and so everyone can see the question, and we will take them. So don't be shy. Don't hesitate to ask question of clarification, or if you want to go further, just write your question, and then we will. The panelists will address it. So let's start with you, Angelika. What do you think about this report?
Yes, thanks a lot, Alexandra, and also thank you for the invitation. Christoph, also thank you for the presentation. I think it really touched upon the most important issues that are part of a debate right now in the Parliament, but also from what we hear in the Council. At least in the Parliament, it's a very timely, a very good time for having this conversation, because we are now working on a compromise text with other political groups. The report was presented back in spring, and then during summer, the political groups have also tabled their amendments. So from what we had so far, we worked over 1 year now on the EID regulation, and we have identified a couple of issues, but also we became very much aware of the potential benefits of this regulation. And if we're taking, for example, what we have right now in Estonia, the digital identity services that they have at the moment, a simple citizen could spare up to 5 days per year just because they don't have to go in person to the public authority. If we were to speak about the potential value of these wallets or of the digital identities in the context of legal persons, we could take the example of the trade sector, where the use of electronic form of documents in one trade transaction could lower the cost to up to 70% from the cost of transactions. So really, the benefits are major. The question is, how do we do this right in order to harness this potential of the wallets and of the digital identity? And here, there are 4 underpinning principles of how the design of a wallet or how a wallet should be designed in order to ensure that we can take advantage of all these benefits. And the first thing, Christoph, you also mentioned it in the paper, it's the aspect of cybersecurity. And here we have to keep in mind that the wallet will be this app that will function on a multitude of devices. And all of these devices have different levels of security. So we need to make sure that the wallet as an app is secure enough. We need to take into account the security elements of the phone and other types of security measures in order to ensure that we have this, that we can achieve this high security level. A second underpinning principle is the idea of privacy. Privacy and full control of the citizens over their data. So when we're talking about the first aspect of privacy, you have mentioned as well this idea of data minimization and zero knowledge proof, which is currently being discussed. We're also discussing in the parliament the idea of pseudonyms, which is already part of a proposal, and we're trying to develop it a bit further in order to make it clear for the citizens and for the users of a wallet in general that they can engage in all types of interactions, and where it is not needed to prove their real identity, they would still have a possibility to do so. You just briefly, I'll touch upon the idea of unique and persistent identifiers that you talked about. We still did not start the conversation on unique and persistent identifiers with the other political groups. What I can say on behalf of Renew and what Alin Mituța shadow has tabled as amendments, and it's an idea that really should be discussed, is indeed in cases of the wallets for natural persons, we would have different identifiers per type of service. However, when we talk about legal persons, it would make sense to have one unique and persistent identifier, because this would allow for the users to have more transparency, particularly when it comes to the implementation of the obligations under the financial regulation. So this is the first part of privacy. And then we have the idea of full control of the data for the citizens, but also for legal persons of wallets. And when we're talking about that, we need to make sure that whoever is issuing or managing the wallet doesn't have any access to the wallet inside, to the content of a wallet, but also to the types of transactions that the user engages in. So this aspect of control, there's quite a lot of emphasis on this at the moment, and we're working to make it stronger. A third priority for the design of a wallet is the idea of usability, user-friendliness, and also functionality of a wallet. And when we talk about accessibility, usability, and friendliness, it's quite clear. We want it to be as easy for the users to use it, but there's also this idea of functionality. So why not be more ambitious? This is really the place where we can work on the wallet and to make sure that they have more than just the access to the digital services. to give a particular example, we will have at least 27 wallets in all of the member states, in different member states all across the union. So what we want at this point is to have at least the minimum of functionalities that each wallet needs to entail. And when we talk about electronic signature, why not have the electronic signature by default built in the wallet? This is something to think about, and it's something also we are right now discussing at the moment. And also maybe to take a step a bit further, why not have the wallets or the devices on which the wallets operate be qualified electronic signature devices? Again, a question that might stir a lot of conversation, but it's something worth discussing and maybe including. And just as a last thing, because I feel I already took too much time, is the idea of interoperability. And again, ideally would have been to have one wallet operate in the EU. We are now aware that this is not possible, so we would have more wallets on the market. But the most important thing is in the end for the users, for them to travel from one country to another and to be able to use that same wallet from the country that they originate without having to download a new wallet or to request it, or depending on the procedure, to have to go through the entire procedure of requesting a new wallet. I will stop here for now, but I'm looking forward to the conversation and also to hearing what the other speakers have to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Angelica. Can I ask you one question on the process? Because Christoph mentioned a bit the date, which I expect for the Parliament, so to have the vote at the end of the year, and then the trilogue starting next year. So how do you see this process? Do you think it's stable, and do you think that when do you expect also to have a strong disagreement with the council, and therefore the trilogue will be difficult, or you sense, let's say, a kind of a convergence of view? Of course, there is always some issue where you are different, like security, like Christoph is mentioning, but was mentioning, and you also. But so how do you see this trilogue taking place, and what kind of the most difficult roadblock that you see in those trilogue negotiation at this stage? And I know everything could evolve, but.
Yes, so in terms of our work in the Parliament, we are, as I said, we're now working on the text. We had quite a big discussion on the design of a wallet, and this has been our main focus until now. It's on the Article 6A that's defining how the wallet should work, how it should be designed. And it's understandable, because once we determine this most important aspects of how a wallet should look like, what the wallet should do, should it be an identification means or should it be a container? So once we determine all of these aspects, the conversation should go much easier afterwards and also much faster. So in terms of Parliament, we are quite aligned on the majority of the issues. It's just a matter of finding the right language. And then again, we're trying also to be more ambitious and to add as many functionalities as possible beyond what was included in the initial proposal. And when it comes to the trilogues, it's hard to predict at this point, but from the conversations we had so far, we all agree on the same principles. We all want to reach the same goal. So we will see how we start the negotiations and how they will look like. But as long as we're working towards achieving the same thing, it should be an interesting but also not very difficult negotiation.
Okay, thank you very much. Now let's go to the industry with David.
First of all, I'll say hard act to follow, Angelica. I think that was a really information-packed sort of overview. I mean, what I'd like to say is that I think it's a very, very positive initiative, and not one that's been created in isolation. I mean, digital identity is something that I think, as you hinted at, Christoph, is existing in Web2 platforms, social media platforms, on the internet. And in parallel, we have a paper identity system, which is existing alongside it. And I think this initiative, quite rightly, is about convergence and the efficiencies that we can get from that. And that does impact not only the consumer experience, but also potentially business and governments. You know, we just need to think about you know, renting a car or going through passport control or proving our bank credentials to see that there is a lot of resources used and a lot of bureaucracy and process in proving your identity. So the opportunity for the region to gain efficiencies from that is absolutely massive. There are a few debates on this. So we know that there's some work that's been done with WC3 and the sort of decentralized ID standards, and that has you know, somehow been led by the private sector. But a lot of good work has been done on defining, you know, a self-sovereign identity. And there's been a lot of debate on whether the identity standards should be decentralized or centralized, first of all. So should it be, should you know, government institutions be issuers of identity credentials which are verified by others, or you know, should you know, and these credentials being owned by the consumer or the identity owner, or you know, in this case, it seems to be that there's a desire to help shape the solution if we're going to accept it. And then the other thing is, should the identities be self-sovereign, i.e., as I was saying, where you know, the identity owner controls those credentials, you know, the issuers issue them, and then you have what you call verifiable credentials, where essentially I go up to rent a car, and because you know, it's been issued by a valid driver's license authority, that credential can be verified by a car rental company, and you have that seamless thing. And these are debates that I'm not necessarily seeing come through in the legislation. I think they're important, but I'm not seeing them being brought out. And I think it's important because it's important not just from a overhead and ecosystem point of view, but it's important from what we're seeing in the Web 2 point of view with social media platforms and data, because linked to identity is data. And you have a model where essentially the platforms can own the data that's associated with the identity, or the people can own the data, be rewarded for it. And that is a question I think that we cannot ignore here. It's going to be critical, not only to the consumer experience, but then also in terms of business models. The other thing I'd say is that, you know, I've personally been involved in a platform called Digital Asset Broker at Vodafone, which has been looking at mastering an interoperable identity for IoT devices. So Digital Asset Broker is about interoperable identities for IoT devices and payments. And we put a wallet in the device. So we've got a device wallet, which is linked to a secure element in the SIM card, and we generate keys, and essentially a device can sign. But what we realize as well is that the device has to belong to a person or a business or an organization. So this matrix between people, business, and thing identities, I think, is very important. I think that maybe there's a risk in delaying that, because essentially businesses have to accept and issue credentials, and people have to use them in ecosystems. So that's something I think is pretty important, that access. If we look at the sort of top wallets in the Web3 world, so MetaMask owned by Consensus, JP Morgan, there's also been some sort of pretty important initiatives there. One of them being what we call Wallet Connect. So essentially it's the wallet, you know, I believe we're moving towards a world for the wallets, but Wallet Connect is about how you essentially can have one wallet that can connect to many wallets in different ecosystems, in different bank accounts, in different platforms. And I think that concept, the interoperability of wallets, we're starting to touch on here, but I think that's important. You know, and you're talking about wallet portability, but this is more about the, you know, wallet interoperability as well. And I just stopped by saying, so I think it's very positive. I think the EU identity wallet is a great framework that we can build on. I do believe that mobile will be critical, not because I'm from an operator, but because a lot of the work is already done. So we've got billions of smartphones out there. I think what we proved with the Digital Asset Broker is that you can use the cryptography and the hardware secure element in the SIM card to basically bring trust and cryptography at the edge for IoT devices. There's no reason we can't extend that. And we have a footprint, and we have trust, and we have scale. So one of the things as we look to the metaverse, and you know, the metaverse is about how you can have a physical identity that can work in digital worlds and digital identities that can work across the ecosystems. But you've got to take that back to some element of accountability, some legal responsibility, some jurisdiction. And I think the phone number is a good candidate to be that interoperable identity, simply because it ties back to KYC and AML, and it's something that's known. It's something that has a lot of adoption, and it's something that could allow us to have a kickstart in terms of adoption. So I'll end there. I think I'm talking too long, but this is a really exciting topic.
Thank you very much, David. I have one follow-up question for you. So first, thanks also for the audience. We already have 2 questions, and I will address them in a bit. But so if the panelists can have a look at them, so they can also be prepared when I come. So you touched about the metaverse, which is interesting. But I had one follow-up question on for you, David, because Christophe was mentioning at the beginning that competition is very important in this field and like in many others. And so how do you see the thing evolving? I mean, do you see that this market for digital identity will indeed be very competitive, or the things that we have seen for the B2C platform with kind of concentration and market tipping will also apply here? How do you see the market evolving? And also, do you think the text, the proposal of the Commission, which is currently being discussed, will help or tilt the market in favor of competition, or it will have no effect on that aspect? So I mean, I know my question is relatively broad, but how do you see the market for digital identity evolving? Basically, that's
yeah. So I welcome what I saw on the Digital Marketing Act, because I thought that was a sort of critical initiative in terms of not allowing lock-in from the big ecosystems. I mean, some of these sort of Web 2, as we call it, ecosystems have billions and billions of users. And if we allow lock-in, then I don't think there will be a lot of competition. But it is a very difficult question, because on the one hand, I think this is a great initiative by the EU to set a framework and to give the direction on how digital identities should be driven forwards. And of course, I think big companies in the banking, healthcare, telco, and other sectors, will be critical to that. But a lot of the competition side will be dependent on the framework and the direction we take. So if the direction is a centralized digital identity, then I don't see a lot of competition, because it's an extension of the current issuers, and there'll be a lot of overhead to put in place the systems. On the other hand, if the direction is decentralized and self-sovereign, then I think the competition is based on the app and the user experience and adding value. And in that case, I could see a lot of competition. So I think those questions will shape the level of competition we have. But I do believe the Digital Marketing Act was a key initiative to put us in the direction where that competition will be possible going forward.
Okay, thanks a lot. And now we have Lara from Comreg. What is your perspective on the report and the future of digital identity in Europe?
Thank you so much, Alex. And God, David, if you thought you had a hard act to follow, I have 2 hard acts to follow now, but I'll try my best to be concise. So thank you to Sarah and Christophe for this paper and for the invitation to participate today. In the EU's twin transition, where we will see society becoming increasingly more digital and hopefully more environmentally sustainable at the same time, reliable and secure digital identities will be key for users to access all the different private and public services that have been mentioned today. So really agree with Angelica's point that the principle of security and privacy design will be key here. And just to say that this proposal for eIDAS 2.0 is part of a broader tranche of EU proposals with the focus on digital, which we think must be read and understood in tandem. So we really appreciate the inclusion of the Digital Markets Act with the DMA, as just highlighted by my fellow panelist, David, as well. So just to note, with regards to electronic identification and trust services, COMREG as a regulator is primarily concerned with the latter part on trust services, as part of our remit going forward will be to be responsible for the qualified trust service providers, or QTSPs, on the trust service list for Ireland. And that trust services, as we know, will augment with this new proposal. And as the regulator for electronic communications, our role and our mission is to ensure that communications markets operate in the interests of end users and society, and that consumers are empowered to choose and use communication services with confidence. So as we move away from this traditional model of government-issued methods of identifications to digital identity solutions that are being put forward by private sector actors and all the choice that comes with that, interoperability, as is the hot topic and mentioned by the previous two panelists, will be an important factor. As stated by Christoph in the paper and also today, the ability to identify digitally will become an important factor for social inclusion, which is obviously very important as well. And this provision of a digital identity will be a strategic asset, as will be the European Digital Identity Wallet, or the EDIW. So in addition to the digital identities, we know that the wallet will house attestation of attributes, such as the medical certificates and everything that is mentioned already today. One can expect that there will be more oversight work for existing national authorities under eIDAS 2.0 with regard to the authentication of these attestations, although it's not totally clear at the moment who all of the players will be in this process of authentication by providers. So COMREG welcomes the call by Christoph to avoid overlaps and inconsistencies in the event that multiple European boards for specific digital regulatory topics, which will obviously increase the overall complexity for the governance of digital markets. And while there should be absolutely consistent application of EU regulation for digital products and services, there needs to be a mindful and coordinated approach at the level of EU institutions. We've already seen across European countries and indeed member states and in the EU conversations and coordination among national sectoral regulators on how to avoid duplication of work when it comes to these digital issues. And finally, just an anecdote, we've recently had a wonderful new colleague join our team from Ukraine, and it's been really eye-opening and quite cool to see the Ukrainian digital wallet in action. Personally, I find it a little bit difficult to visualize or conceptualize a new idea until you see it kind of in the flesh and you're able to flick through it yourself. So this Ukrainian approach to the digital wallet, where you can access your digital documents, just really underpins, I suppose, the importance of such connectivity and access to your personal data, and also giving users more control over their personal data. And I know this paper goes into aspects of giving users more control there, whether it's measures to avoid tracking or indeed the concept of data minimization. So I think we're running a little bit over time, so I'll wrap up my comments for the moment, but I really look forward to the discussion we'll have here today.
Thank you very much, Lara. Can I also ask you maybe one follow-up question on for you on what you said and on the institutional aspect? So you say we have to be mindful of not duplicating too much, and I mean it's true with this duplication of, I mean this multiplication, sorry, of digital law. We have also to be careful of not of maximizing, let's say, the synergies on enforcement, because all of that will be very complicated. But so specifically, you mentioned that, but if you can develop it a little bit, what kind of role do you see for the Telecom Regulatory Authority in, you know, organizing, regulating, supervising digital identity? Do you see any role, and which kind of role do you think telecom regulator like yours, like you, are particularly well placed to play a role in the digital identity regulation ecosystem, if we can talk about it, because, you know, we have more and more ecosystem of regulation in Europe. So.
Certainly. So to begin with kind of the first part of your question, even just from a linguistic point of view, I know that we have the EDIB, or the European Digital Identity Board, when it comes to eIDAS, but then you also have the European Data Innovation Board when it comes to the DGA, the Data Governance Act, and the DA. So they both have the same acronym. So across these tranche, it'd be helpful on a perhaps selfish note to avoid confusion in-house here if we could have different acronyms. But when it comes to being a telecoms regulator and a regulator for electronic communications, we won't necessarily be giving regulatory oversight of the identities themselves, but when it comes to the verification and the qualification of both the IDs and the attestation of attributes into the wallet, that's where we will be involved. And that's why we've such a keen interest in keeping up with the technical, legal and policy developments when it comes to the digital identity space. Although it's it's something that when the paper talks about the attestation of attributes, I think it states that any entity that collects, creates, and issues attested attributes such as diplomas, licenses, and certificates of birth should be able to become providers of electronic attestation of attributes. And I think there's an expectation there that at local and regional level, that these bodies will have the capacity and the ability to create electronic attestation of attributes. And then, you know, it's unclear if they would fall under regulatory remit as well. So I think a little bit of clarity would be very welcome there from our perspective.
Thank you very much. No, so we have several questions in the Q&A, and thanks very much for to the audience to raising those questions. So let's start maybe with the first and the third question, and I will go to Angelica first, because some questions were directly addressed to you, Angelica, and then maybe to Christoph on those two issues. So this is question 1 and question 3, and then we will go to the others. So the first is you have seen, it's a question by Ellen, and she asked whether the fact that the access obligation or some access obligation in the proposal is just limited to very large online platform, and she seems to imply in her question that it's maybe a bit too limited. And maybe more compulsory access, if I understood correctly the question, should be imposed. So that's the first. What do you think about that? And Christoph, I will ask you that as well. And then maybe we can go also to the third question by Karinder, who is mentioning the benefit with disability, because you mentioned accessibility and the importance, and the Parliament has always been very keen on those issues of accessibility and taking into account disability access of people, disabled people. So if you can address those two questions, so more access and what do you do for accessibility, and then I will go to Christoph, and then we will address the other question.
Thanks a lot for the questions. I will maybe start with the second one, because on the second question, what we had in the beginning in the proposal of a commission initially was that there is no communication between two wallets. So you would have a wallet, and the wallet would serve basically to identify yourself and for a relying party to check who you are and your identity. What we have introduced now, or at least it's what we're discussing and we're working towards it, is the idea of communication between two wallets as well. This would help with, particularly also in the situations where we have people with disabilities, people with limited capacity of exercise, in the cases of minors, for example, as well. How does this interaction of wallet to wallet work? So in practical terms, if I have a wallet and, for example, David has a wallet as well, I can give some sort of permission from my wallet to David to perform some acts either on my behalf, if I can do so, or by himself, so by himself directly from his wallet. So from this perspective, we would allow people to also share a bit of the way they interact with the wallet, but also who is performing certain actions. So this is one aspect in relation to disability, to people with disabilities. And then the second part is also on how the app is designed in itself to be, adaptable to all types of situations. And this is something that is already falls under the toolbox, because what we can develop at this point, or what we can do at this point, is to make sure that we have all of these requirements for the wallet. But then how exactly this is transposed in practice and how this is designed, it will be up to the member states. And each member state might find the different creative solutions on how they make it applicable for all types of situations. It might be useful also maybe to have a look at the wallet that exists in Singapore. It's probably one of the closest wallets that exist nowadays to what we're trying to achieve now in the EU. So might be an interesting approach. And in regards to the first question, the question of Ellen on the authentication on very large online platforms. So what we have in the proposal right now is that any user can use the wallet in order to authenticate or even identify themselves on an online platform. There is a huge debate here, coming also from being brought up also by the gatekeepers. There seems to be an understanding that we're trying to impose the wallet as a unique solution for authentication, and to exclude all of the other authentication procedures that have already been developed by their large online platforms. This is, however, not the purpose. The purpose is to have an alternative solution, which would be the wallet. So in practical terms, when you're entering on the web page of one online platform, you would have the possibility where you can log in with as you can log in nowadays, but you'll also have the button that says, let's say, European European Digital Identity Wallet. No, you would press on it, and it would serve more as an interface, which would redirect you, and then the wallet you would be able to confirm that this is indeed you and that you want to log in. Therefore, from this perspective, it's just an alternative solution. It should not give any access to the secure element in any way. This is what we're trying to avoid here. We're trying to make sure that we have as little access to the wallets, for the relying parties to have as little access to the wallets of the users as possible. I hope I answered this question, and just maybe as a very brief comment on the question of Matteo on the digital identities and the IoTs. This whole conversation can also be linked very well with the Data Act that is currently also being discussed. Because in the Data Act, we have certain requirements on how products, IoT devices. So the Data Act is covering the idea of how data, non-personal data, is being shared among private entities, among companies. So it also imposes certain design requirements of IoTs. And when we're talking about the design requirements, this could be something that we can add in there, and that would be this particular identifier for each IoT. This can also be expanded in the Cyber Resilience Act, depending where it fits better. But we can also take a first step and introduce it in the EID as well now, so we don't wait for an EIDAS number 3. So that's part of the conversation. It's something that it's not too late. It can be approached, and it can also be included in the proposal.
Thank you, Angelica. Now, Christoph, what do you think about this access, this access obligation in the proposal? And do you think they should go further, not as far? How do you see that question?
In my conversations with various stakeholders when I was working on the report, this was a topic that was coming up again and again, and it seems to be essential for a true interoperability between different solutions, between different identity solutions offered by different providers. As a lawyer, I'm maybe not the ideal person to comment on these very technical issues, but I do understand that there is mainly this trade-off between offering effective interoperability and security on the other hand, and this reminds me a little bit of the also very technical debate on interoperability of messaging services, which is also a major topic under the Digital Markets Act, where some stakeholders always emphasize that granting interoperability may compromise the security of the system, and I see a parallel here, and I, as a lawyer, I'm probably unable to say whether this claim is true, but from, let's say, from a regulatory perspective, if access to the secure element is necessary for interoperability, I think that it should be worth looking for a solution, because otherwise, if there's no interoperability, then we will see a login effects here, and that is certainly not what the European Commission and what the European legislator is looking for. So.
Thank you. David, maybe I will turn to you now, but I mean, first, I don't know if you have a view on that question as well, about how far the access should be imposed. And then if you have also a view of on the last question of Michiel about some form of web ID, and that may help the decentralization that you are calling for. So on those two issues, access and how to achieve decentralization, I don't know if you have a view, and then we will go to the question on the metaverse and the future proofing of the. But maybe first, David, if you have a view on those two questions.
Sure. So I think in terms of access, there's a dilemma because while we're shaping this legislation, there is a big debate going on about Web 2, which is largely the streaming, internet and social media platforms, and the recent advent over the last 10 years of Web 3, which technology largely built on a decentralized ideal. It's not all decentralized. There's a centralized element to it, and we're starting to see regulation. But there is a sort of big sort of debate between the two approaches, right? And in terms of accessing different ecosystems, the Web3 school is about interoperability. It's about how you can move seamlessly across ecosystems, how you can port your ID, how you can bring value across these different ecosystems, how your wallet through something like Wallet Connect can work and hold value and exchange value across different ecosystems. So that is where Web3 is going. And of course, Web2, you're starting to see some limited interoperability, but that is not the principle. The principle is about lock-in, essentially, and data monetization from ecosystem. And the question is, where should this legislation be pitched? Should it be pitched for Web 2? Should it be pitched for Web 3? Or should it be pitched for Web 2.5, right? Which is a hybrid of the two. And I don't know the answer to that, right? We have one that has the adoption of billions of people. Web 3 doesn't quite have that. But in terms of access, what we're seeing, and I probably go on to the metaverse question, what we're seeing with the metaverse is that interoperability will be absolutely key across physical, financial, gaming, and other ecosystems. And if it's going to be key, in the metaverse, and we're looking at huge projections of $1 trillion, I think McKinsey said by 2030 the metaverse will be worth. Then maybe the legislation needs to start paying attention to that. So I think the access, the technical question of interoperability and secure elements, etc., I think can be solved. Indeed, we're already looking forward to quantum-proof cryptography, code-based or lattice-based cryptography, which will replace RSA and elliptic curve. So I think the technical side of it can be addressed, but it's more the political side, the ideal side, the mission that we need to look at. So I think that's an important thing. We cannot ignore the metaverse and that 1 trillion opportunity by 2030. That's only 8 years away. And I think the other question on, I just addressed that question, Alexandra. The other point I'd make is that the key to this will be adoption. So with everything, I think there's something coming across here, which is, okay, does the EU set policy? And I think this is a really welcome policy. Or do they try and become a technology company, right? And I think the technology, as we're seeing, there's been a lot of work done on digital identity. There's been a lot of work done on wallets. There's been a lot of work done on interoperability. And I think it comes back to the point Christoph was making earlier about whether, we set a framework and we allow these companies to compete to provide the most value-added solution, or whether we try and dictate the solution. And I think maybe we've learned in the past that dictating the solution, by the time it's implemented, it may be out of date. So I think that's one point I'd like to get across.
Thanks, David. So, but I think also you made another very important point, is that in this trade-off bit that Christophe was mentioning between interoperability and security, maybe quantum technologies will help to reduce that trade-off, not of course to make the trade-off disappearing, but to reduce that trade-off. And in terms of policy direction, because you're right, I mean, I think what we should expect from Angelica and her colleague is to give policy direction, but not of course privilege one technology over another, or one solution over another. There is always this principle of technological neutrality, which I think has always been very good. But the direction is supposed to be given. And my own view of the different work that the European institutions are doing with the DMA, with the Data Act that Angelica was mentioning, and here is to try to, to open the platform, the data, as much as possible. That's, I think, the logic. So in a way, it goes in the logic of the Web3, you know, and the idea is really to open all of that, to try to have as much competition and idea and at the end innovation, because that's really what we care about in those sectors, as well as user choices. So I think there is a kind of direction that you can find in the different initiative that the Commission has proposed and that the EU lawmaker has adopted or is about to adopt, you know. And the question, of course, is all those trade-offs that are implied by this opening approach and how technology can help to reduce those trade-offs like quantum, as you were discussing. So that leads us to this last question about the metaverse that you touched already upon. So the question at the end of Matteo is the proposal robust enough to deal with a new issue like the metaverses? And also, do you think that in the initiative that the Commission has proposed on virtual worlds, do you think we should have something on identity as such? And if yes, what? So Christophe, maybe you can start. We can start with you. So if you have to advise Commissioner Breton and Executive Vice President Vestager, what will you tell them?
Well, I agree with David that it is indeed important to look forward and provide solutions that are, let's say, open enough also to embrace new developments like the metaverse. And I personally see, although the metaverse is a bit of a moving target and we don't fully see how it will play out, but I could imagine that let's say avatar identities could be a sort of attribute in a wallet. Just like a sort of membership card that you add to a wallet. In a sense, I think that avatar identity, if you want to ensure that the avatar that you're interacting with is representing a human, the identity of the avatar has to be tied back somehow to a human identity. And so if the avatar identity is a sort of element, a component of the wallet, just like my frequent flyer membership card that I put in the wallet, I could imagine that the wallet is metaverse proof, but that's an off the cuff answer. I'm not sure.
Okay.
Just to jump in there
yes,
as well.
No, I was going
Alex,
to you.
Thank you. I believe the European Commission over the summer, I think there was an EPRS paper released, a short note on the metaverse. And I think the official line is that the European Commission don't have any designs on providing regulation specifically for the metaverse, and that they expect the DMA and the DSA, for example, to kind of cover activities that will take place. I think there's a little bit of hubris there in the sense that we've already seen that EIDAS 2.0 was needed because the landscape just changed so much from when EIDAS 1 was written. And I think that, you know, there are early adopters of the metaverse, but people are going to be using the metaverse in ways we can't even imagine now. So I do think that there'd be a bit of push and pull there in terms of what regulation is needed. I think David made an interesting point as well, that adoption will be so key for both the digital identities and the wallets. and interoperability obviously will be key for the metaverse. We've done a small bit of analysis in-house so far, and we've seen that at the moment it's kind of walled meta gardens or walled meta islands at the moment, and that we haven't kind of seen the metaverse as a paradigm shift and a concept kind of unfold completely. But hopefully if we get this concept of digital identities right for EU citizens at least, that will enable the take-up of the metaverse and also the kind of fun aspect of the metaverse. I mean, we already see if you log in online, how annoying is it to approve a cookie every time you go onto a website? We don't want to have to sign up and register ourselves for every single kind of activity that will go on in this kind of future digital reality. I see Angelica's hand is up, so I'll keep it at that.
Yes, if I may jump in here, because I heard the comments of Christoph and Lara, and it brought me to another idea. So we were not considering the idea of metaverse when working on the proposal, but without thinking of it, we introduced this possibility for the user to generate its own attributes. And this was, we were keeping this in mind for the situations of legal persons in particular, because if you have a wallet of a legal person, they probably want to issue an attribute to give a possibility to one of their employees to go sign a contract or perform any sort of activity. So building up on this, it could be also used in the context of metaverse, where users create their own attributes and their own, let's say, identity from an attribute to interact in the metaverse. But indeed, it's hard to predict because we don't know how it's going to develop, but it might be a way to start maybe.
Yes, thank you very much for that. So we are about to finish a conversation, but before that, there is one question by Danielle who came and who asked whether, in terms of adoption and adoption being key, as David was mentioning, we may see a link of the EU digital identity wallet and the digital euro. So it's clear that those are two projects which are run in parallel by the EU institution, but different EU institutions. So do you see any link or also, and maybe more broadly, you know, in terms of adoption, what kind of, services could help the adoption of the wallet that is mentioning, because adoption is key. But so I don't know who wants to address this question.
I'll probably jump in on this one. So first of all, I'll just say that, you know, I mean, I mentioned this a while ago, but we're moving towards a world of wallets where essentially, you know, rather than having bank accounts and paper documents, you know, people, business, organizations, maybe even countries will have wallets that hold identities, that will hold payment credentials, that will hold other identity documents. And, you know, this is key to the evolution to the digital world. And in terms of adoption, you know, what do we have to kickstart that? We have a population of over 6 billion smartphones globally, a significant portion in the EU as well. We have over 40 billion IoT devices. You know, and part of the problem we're looking at, or the problem we could solve to kickstart adoption, is how can we link those devices to identity, and how can we link those devices and the identity to the platforms that people are using. Part of some of the things I've personally looked at is how you can link phones and devices to blockchains, but also other platforms, right? And how can we have interoperability? So from a sort of operator point of view, that is something where I think we've got a big role to play. And obviously, you know, looking at the secure element and the cryptography we have in the phone and the link to KYC and AML, I think this is a good start to kickstarting identity. So the first use case is communications, and communications will, you know, it's obviously prevalent and beneficial in the real world. And I believe that communications in the real world to the metaverse world and between different ecosystems is also something where we have to innovate and evolve, but it's also going to be a key part of how communications go forwards. In terms of you know, linking, you know, a wallet and connectivity and you know, to currency, I mean, obviously that is the next step, right? Is you know, how you can start to seamlessly transact value through, without having to what we call on-ramp and on-ramp from fiat currency, but using a digital currency, that will be absolutely critical, because then you have business and customer experiences which are end-to-end automated. And I see a big benefit in these two things starting to link once the central bank digital currency projects are mature enough. I think worldwide, at the last count, there were over 100, significant proportion in the EU, which are in sort of test or proof of concept stage. But maybe that's where we are with the wallet. And I believe that the central bank digital currencies will be part of the wallet. They will be, payment credentials and value that will be held in the wallet. And I think when you put those things together, then it opens up a huge amount of use cases: mortgage payments, lending, paying for education, paying for other things, which I think will kickstart the adoption. But I do believe that part of what we need to do is connect the smartphone and IoT devices to these ecosystems in an efficient way, because that is one of the key enablers.
Thank you very much. So now to finish, I want to ask all our panelists to, let's say, give us very briefly, in 1 minute, if possible, their takeaway, and also if they have one piece of advice to give to the boss of Angelica and her colleague to improve the text that is currently on the table, what will it be? So I suggest to go in the reverse order where we start. So we start with Lara, and then David, Angelica, and we will finish by the author of the issue paper, Christoph. So what is your takeaway, and one piece of advice for Angelica? What would it be?
Thank you, Alex. So my takeaway would actually be that the digital identities and the digital identity wallets sit in a landscape that should close the digital divide and not widen the gap there. And I know that BEREC as a body has done a bit of work on this as well. My one piece of advice, if I could, for Angelica's boss would be A, new innovative acronyms, please, and B, if there could be a little bit more clarity on who the regulated entities would be at that regional level for the attestation of attributes. Because, I mean, there's one thing to issue an attestation of attribute, but also in the case where it's revoked, and how the different players can communicate that, and what will be included on those new trust service lists.
No, the issue of terminology is an old problem in the EU. One of the main thing I teach in EU law, the first course, is the difference between the European Council and the Council of the European Union, which are completely different institutions. But if you think about it, I mean, it doesn't make sense to have such a close name for two institutions, which are, so it's an old problem. But yes, indeed, sometimes we should solve it. David.
Okay, so yeah, so for me, really quickly, as I've been trying to make the case, think of connectivity, right? A lot of smartphones, a lot of people connected. The wallet will need to be connected, right? Connectivity will need to carry messaging and will need to power the wallet. So let's start to build that into our thinking. From now, we started to do it, but we can't do it in isolation. Connecting smartphones and IoT devices is something that I think needs to be embedded in the thinking. I think 5G obviously playing an important role. I think the other thing I'd say is look at an approach. Let's learn from the past and look at an approach that will maximize innovation. What we've seen with Web3 is massive innovation coming from different organizations across the world and different people across the world. Let's try and do that, because that will be key to this thing, to this identity moving effectively and evolving effectively across the world. And the other thing I'd say is, I think, they say digital native. I think we've got to be metaverse native, and we've got to be IoT native on this. So I think that's something that Christoph mentioned as an extension. I think 40 billion IoT devices, a 1 trillion metaverse opportunity by 2030, probably means that we should be considering that in the legislation, or at least trying to cover that in the direction of the legislation. So those are my 3 points. Thank you. But I can't give you advice, Angelica. I think it's a great job so far on the legislation.
Thanks a lot, Angelica. What is your takeaway? I guess you should not give advice to yourself, but at least some takeaway that you will relate to your boss and the colleague of your boss.
Thanks a lot for the advices of David and Lara. They're all, both of them, well noted, and will work on that, especially on the acronyms part, which is again always a problem. When it comes to the wallet, but also maybe not an advice to ourselves, but maybe more of a request coming towards the industry. We want to achieve this very ambitious wallet, and we have in mind all of these potential use cases. But then we still have some regulatory barriers in some cases. For example, it's very hard to envisage how we will have payments as a use case, or even cryptocurrencies, because for financial institutions, they still have some rules in place where they need access to the history of transactions and so on. At the same time, we want this wallet to, for the reliant parties in the wallet, to have as little access as possible. So from this example, what I want to say is that we want it very ambitious, but we want to make sure that we still keep a very high level of privacy, security, and all of the rest of the principles. And I guess what we're lacking, or where we would really need support, is from a technical perspective to understand how we can achieve these things, because technology is evolving, and for sure we can achieve to a certain extent all these goals, but we need the help of the industry to tell us exactly how this is doable and how we can make it work. So I think it's more of a call towards everyone who is a representative of the industry and stakeholders to get involved and to be as active as possible. And we're very happy to discuss it and to see how we can implement it.
Thank you very much. And then Christoph.
Yeah, I would like to add only one thought, and that is for the European digital identity wallet to become a success, it is necessary that it is eventually adopted by the users. And for this, I think there are two main factors, and one is trust, and the other is convenience or functionality. And I think that is key, that the final legislative framework, on the one hand, inspires trust, and that requires a sound level of privacy and cybersecurity. So trust is essential, otherwise it won't fly. And the second factor is convenience, functionality, that you can do something with this. And I think the lessons we have learned from eIDAS 1.0, which did not fully achieve its objectives, although it was an innovative idea when it was launched in 2014. I think that's important, that this time it's done right with regard to trust and convenience.
Thank you very much, Christoph. Thank you very much to all the panelists. So you can find the issue paper of Christoph on the SER website. So don't hesitate to go there, also to register to our newsletter. We have several events that we will organize until the end of the year. One is on the Digital Services Act that we were mentioning. Another one is on the Digital Market Act that we were also mentioning. So several events this year, and then of course others next year. But so just register to the newsletter, so we'll receive everything. Many thanks to all the audience for your question. I'm sorry we couldn't address the last two questions, but because we have to close. I'm very sorry for that. And thanks to all the panelists and to Christoph for your wonderful note. Thank you very much, and have a good afternoon or good morning.